I had the absurd idea to decorate levels from the recent tab. This is my first idea for a Geometry Dash challenge, so be sure to let me know in the comments what you think of it. Anyway, let's get into the video. It took me a while to find a level that wasn't directly copied, but I eventually found one. The problem with this level is that the gameplay is built in such a way that the camera constantly moves up and down, which means I have to cover all the more space with my decoration. I immediately started with the structures. I wanted them to be thin, being only one block thick. The reason for this is because it is much easier to decorate thin structures than large ones. I decided to keep the dark background and ground this level had, and have the design feel very artificial, using industrial objects for the decoration. As you can notice, I'm copy and pasting a lot of structures. This is because, well, this is a recent level, not one of my own projects, so I didn't want to pour so much time and effort into decorating this. This is also why I omitted some level creation norms such as 3D, since adding that to all the structures would take a long time. After I finished laying out the structures, I then started filling them in. I used these mechanical looking objects as block design, and went with this blue color for the level. I know this design isn't the greatest, especially with it just being this alone, but remember, this isn't a serious creation of mine, so I am obviously not going for too much. Just some basic decoration that I would call rate-worthy. I stopped for now right at the ship part, since I wasn't yet sure what I was going to do for that part. I then went ahead and started working on the ground spikes. For them, I use these indented looking objects as to me, they look a lot like conveyor belts, or at least like something one would find in a factory. Another good thing about these objects is that they actually have these outlines that fit perfectly on them, so I used those as well. I put these between the structures, which did a good job at filling in the empty space. They're definitely not as detailed as the block design, but they work. Once I finished this, I started working on air decoration. I made this very simple arrow design which I used. I then placed these around to fill in the large empty spaces. I then added these beam looking connector blocks to the ground spikes, making one of the colors invisible to only show the middle of it. These ended up working nicely to complement the rather empty ground spikes, as well as fill in more space. Afterwards, I went on to add pulses, which pulses the object outline black for half a second. They aren't much, but they add some liveliness to the level. I then made some saw blades to fill in more empty space. I didn't do a whole lot for the saw blades, using the default gear ones which I thought fit the theme, along with these ones layered on top of them. Using the same blocks in the block design, I made this pillar which I used to place around in the background. I could have made them move, but once again, this isn't a serious creation of mine. It took me a while to get the brightness right, but once I did, they made for a really nice background of sorts. I then started working on the ship part. I built these structures simultaneously with the block design. It took me a while to get right, but I eventually got a decent design going. The problem with this part is that making the structures thin like before wouldn't work with the gameplay of the level. Because of this, I feel that this part didn't turn out as good as the part before it. Nevertheless, I decorated the part. Mainly all I did was reuse the designs I made in the last part. I widened this straight fly bit a bit to make it symmetrical with the top. If this were a serious project, I would build off the grid to avoid nerfing it, but as I've said many times, this is not a serious project. I removed the only moving object in the level since what it did could be achieved by just adding one block, and I decorated the part the same way I did the other one before it. I eventually added these thin black blocks to fill in some space in the block design, and while I don't think they look too amazing, I think they at least improved the block design just a bit. I then added all orbs and portals to a group ID and made them blue to further fit the color scheme. Anyway, here is the final product. Overall, I am not sure how I feel about this. It never turned out to be my worst attempt, but I still think it could be better. I feel limiting myself with the plain color scheme and empty background really took away a lot of the potential this had, but given the circumstances, I think this came out decently well. For my next go at this challenge, the recent tab gave me this level. Compared to the previous one, this one has much better gameplay. It also has some basic coin routes that I will have to decorate. I started off by setting the colors and building the structures. I turned this part with tall, thin structures to use bigger structures since it looked better and fit the style I had in mind for this level better. Building the structures for the ship part was the most challenging because of the inconvenient gameplay. I removed this saw blade spam and decided to just replace it with pillars that you fly through. It's generic, I know, but I think it is better than just rows of saw blades. I decided that I was not going to decorate past the ship part for the sake of time. There wasn't much left to the level anyway, so it is not like I'm missing out on much. I then finished the structures and began working on the block design. I used these grass blocks, deciding to give the level a nature theme, avoiding the use of mechanical blocks that I used in the previous level. I made the grass part of the blocks yellow, since I thought it looked nice with the predominantly blue color scheme I had going for in the level. I placed some black glow on the sides to give the blocks some shading, making them feel less flat. For the ground spikes, I used these animated spike pieces, alongside some water and yellow decorative spikes. I then began working on the ship part. I fill in the structures with the same grass blocks I used before. For the first coin, I wanted it to almost be inside the structure, so I tried to decorate it accordingly. After I filled the structures, I began placing the black glow. And yes, I'm aware I forgot to color the glow for this structure. Don't worry, I eventually fixed it. I then went ahead and began placing spikes around simply to act as obstacles, but also fill in some empty space. I then grabbed the ground spikes I made earlier and fill in the ship part with them. I placed these monsters in them to fill in even more space and add a little more detail to the part. I also fixed the block design glow I forgot to color, which I mentioned earlier. I spent some time working on the second coin, and then go back to the first cube part to work on it some more. I placed these structures in the sky to fill in some space, and yes, I know, I copy and paste them a lot, but once again, this isn't a serious project of mine. I then scroll around the editor for a bit, thinking of what to do. After spending a bit of time thinking, I work on an arrow design for the part. I use this basic pulsing arrow, but add blending and black variations of it underneath to make it stand out more. After placing these arrows around the level, I then make this pillar and place that around too. I then use these pulsing circles to fill in even more space. I noticed that there was still some more empty space I could fill, so I made these simple saw blades and placed them around. To make the part more lively, I add some pulses. After taking some time to think again, I changed the background of this one since it feels much less flat due to the way the bricks in it stand out. I then placed some more saw blades and made this little design to place around the ship part since I felt it was a little bit empty. I then worked on the transition between the cube part and the ship part, raising this portal up a block so I could place some blocks below it. I then placed more saws, and then I finished. Here's the final product. Out of all the recent levels I decorated for this video, this one took me the longest to make, yet I still don't think it is the best one out of the ones I made. One of the main reasons it took so long is simply because of how long it was, or at least how much of it I chose to decorate. I would say that my next go at this challenge is just slightly better, but part of the reason for that is because of how short it was, giving me more time to focus on specific details. The recent tab gave me this level, and it is honestly pretty average, about what you'd expect from the recent tab. The gameplay isn't outstanding, but it isn't super hard to work with either. I begin giving this level this purple color, and then work on the structures as I've started with the previous two levels so far. Before working on any more structures than just the first block, I already begin working on the block design. For this design, I used the grass blocks once again, though made the grass part extend all the way around the edge of the block and not just the top. I experimented numerous times with making the grass green to contrast with the purple background, but I could never get it to look the way I wanted, so I eventually just made it purple like the rest of the level. I then work on the next structure, using the same design that I used for the first one. I then place some spikes around, using them to fill in more space, especially since the level was very close to the floor, meaning filling in the lower space with structures was not possible. I thought about decorating these face things, but bothered not to simply because I would most likely just scrap them and continue the design I had going for. I then made some structures in the sky to fill in more space in the top half of the level. I then placed some black glow where the structures connected to add some shading. I then worked on ground spikes, and by that I mean only 4 grid spaces worth. I just placed some basic black spike objects and put some decoration on top of them. Since they were not too important for a level on the floor, I bothered not to put too much time into them. I then finally removed this monster here and replaced it with a spike. I then began working on an arrow design very similar to the first level I decorated in this video. I then placed these around the level. Afterwards, I got these pulsing objects and began placing them around too, filling in even more space. I then made these pillars and placed them around in the background. They aren't much, but they work to complement the level some more. Come to think of it, maybe part of the reason I prefer this over the last level I decorated is because of some small details such as these simple background pillars and eventually grass pieces which I place around. I then place around the grass as I just mentioned, and the part is beginning to take shape. I conclude by making these simple saw blades and placing them around, filling in some space in the air. Finally, I place some pulses and the part is complete. Here is the final product. This is probably my favorite end product out of all of them I did for this video. It is simple, but it works. This one and the next level I will decorate were the ones that I spent the least amount of time on, mainly because of their length. Anyway, my next and final attempt at this challenge is where things go downhill quick. I was honestly surprised with the quality of this gameplay. The recent tab gave me this gameplay and I found it incredibly fun. Unfortunately, I don't think I did this gameplay justice with my decoration. I was immediately lost with how to decorate this, and as you can see, I started by just placing these random blocks. Out of all the levels so far, I had at least a basic idea on how I was going to decorate it, but this level caught me by surprise. One difficulty I faced while decorating this were the slopes. Decorating slopes is not the most bearable of tasks because of the limited object choices we have for them. Unfortunately, unlike the previous level, I couldn't omit them here since they were actually part of the gameplay. I placed around these black cubes to use as platforms, alternating between one big and one small. Because of my lack of ideas for this level, I didn't want to decorate too much, so I only decorated up to the spider part. I then made some smaller platforms with spikes to place around, filling in more empty space. I also got some of the bigger structures and placed them around to fill in space. I then placed some saws around, and you guessed it, to fill in more space. I was at this point that I realized I didn't really know what to do. I had some very basic platforms around, and to be honest, I had a lot of options. I decided to use these pulsing squares to create a background, kind of like the ones Funny Game uses. I thought it would be cool if I used a dual color scheme of it, which is why I made one side of the background blue and the other side orange. I eventually made the background change colors throughout the part. I tried to improve the slopes a bit, and then made the background change colors as I said. Anyway, here's the final product. Out of all the levels I decorated for this video, this one came out the worst, which is unfortunate since the gameplay I was given was actually really good and did not deserve this subpar decoration. So overall, I found this challenge pretty interesting. I kinda wish I stayed more true to what the levels had going for, rather than just scrapping a lot of their ideas. If I ever do this challenge again, I will totally try and do that, as it will probably add extra difficulty to this already tough challenge. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, subscribing to my channel is the best way to support me. Only a very small percentage of my viewers are actually subscribed, so if you want to support me, please consider subscribing. I really appreciate it. Thanks for watching, and I hope you have a great day, as always.